Leafs Nation. I'm going to be honest with you. The news coming out today around the Maple Leafs is the kind that makes you shake your head a little and wonder where this team is actually heading. I'm Victor, and if you follow the Leafs every day like I do, you probably saw these two stories popping up everywhere today. First, a report saying that despite all the frustration around the season, Brad Treliving is expected to stay as the general manager, even though a lot of fans were hoping for major changes in the front office. And at the exact same time, trade rumors around Knies are heating up again, with reports suggesting teams, including the Montreal Canadiens, could be interested in the 23-year-old power forward this summer. So think about that for a second. The GM might be staying, but one of the most promising young players on the roster could be a serious trade target. That combination says a lot about the moment this franchise is living right now. So in this video, we're going to break down what this report about Treliving really means for the future of the Leafs, and why Knies' name suddenly being all over the rumor mill has fans in Toronto paying very close attention. And before we dive into all of that, if you're part of Leafs Nation and you enjoy talking Leafs like real fans do here on the channel, hit subscribe and join the conversation. All right, Leafs Nation, let's talk about this report involving Brad Treliving, because honestly, this is probably not the news a lot of fans in Toronto were hoping to hear. Now that the NHL trade deadline has come and gone, the conversation around the Maple Leafs has shifted from what they might do to what they actually did. And if you've been following the reaction from the fan base, you know there are a lot of mixed feelings right now. A lot of questions started popping up the moment the deadline passed. Did the Leafs really do enough? Did they get enough value back for the players they moved? And maybe the biggest question of all, what exactly is the plan for this team moving forward? Because when you look at how this season has played out, it's been frustrating for a lot of people in Leafs Nation. There were trades, there were roster changes, but at the same time, the organization never fully committed to a rebuild either. It felt more like a partial reset, almost like the team is hoping this season was just an anomaly. And when a year goes like that, fans naturally start looking at the front office. A lot of people have pointed directly at general manager Brad Treliving. He's the one who spent multiple first-round picks in recent years. He's the one who moved prospects that, in hindsight, could potentially be contributing to the roster right now. And when the result ends up being a season that feels disappointing or directionless, the criticism tends to land on the GM. That's why a lot of Leafs fans started hoping there might be a big change coming after the season. But according to a recent report from David Pagnotta of the Fourth Period, that change might not be happening. Pagnotta reported that the belief around the league is that Brad Treliving is expected to stay on as the Maple Leafs general manager. Now, even after everything that has happened this season. Now, he also mentioned something interesting. While the front office might stay the same, a change behind the bench, would not be surprising. So the possibility of a coaching change is definitely still on the table. And that opens up a really interesting scenario. Because if the Leafs were to bring in a more offensively minded coach, someone who could fully unleash the talent already on this roster, guys like Austin Matthews, William Nylander, and the rest of the offensive core, then maybe the organization believes this team can still turn things around quickly. In other words, instead of tearing everything down and starting from scratch, the Leafs might be looking for a quick retool. The idea would be to adjust the system, tweak the roster, maybe make some smarter moves during the offseason, and try to get right back into playoff contention next year. Now, in theory, that sounds reasonable. But the problem, and I think a lot of fans feel this, is the lack of confidence in whether Treliving is the guy who can actually pull that off. Because making a quick turnaround in today's NHL is not easy. You have to make the right trades. You have to manage the salary cap carefully. You have to identify the exact pieces the team is missing. And if you get even one of those decisions wrong, you can easily lose another season. The organization may be sticking with the same GM, but that means the pressure on Treliving this summer is going to be massive. If he stays in charge, then this upcoming offseason becomes one of the most important stretches of his career. Because he'll be the one responsible for proving that this roster can actually compete again. And as a fan, I think that's where the tension sits right now. There's still a lot of talent on this team. Nobody is denying that. But the direction of the organization still feels a little uncertain, and that's why reports like this spark such strong reactions from the fan base. Now here's where things start to get even more interesting. Because while people are talking about the future of the general manager and what the front office might do next, there's another conversation starting to heat up around the roster itself. And this one involves a young player who has become a really important part of the Leafs lineup. And when you hear which team might be looking at him and how serious that interest could be, you start to understand why Leafs fans are paying very close attention to the rumor mill right now. Now let's talk about the other story that's starting to get a lot of attention around the league. And this one involves a player that many fans see as a big part of the future in Toronto, Matthew Knies. According to reports circulating around the NHL rumor mill, the Montreal Canadiens were working on what could have been a significant trade before the deadline. That deal never actually happened, but Canadiens GM Kent Hughes hinted that the conversation might come back this summer. And here's where things get interesting. According to Sportsnet's Nick Kypreos, the team Montreal had been talking with was none other than the Toronto Maple Leafs. He didn't confirm exactly which player the Canadiens were targeting, but the belief around the league is that the name involved could have been Matthew Knies. And the moment that possibility came out, fans in both Toronto and Montreal immediately started talking about it. Because if you know anything about hockey culture, you know how intense that rivalry is. The idea of the Leafs trading a young power forward like Knies to the Canadiens is the kind of rumor that instantly grabs attention. Now, to be clear, nothing has happened. Knies is still a Maple Leaf, and there has been no deal. But the fact that his name keeps appearing in trade discussions tells you something important about the situation in Toronto. For one, Knies is the kind of player that would attract serious interest across the league. He's only 23 years old, he plays a power forward style that teams love, and he's under contract long-term on a 6-year deal worth $46.5 million. That contract is actually considered very reasonable for a player with his size, skill, and potential. And another detail that makes this interesting is that Knies does not have trade protection in that contract. So technically, if the Maple Leafs ever decided to move him as part of a bigger roster change, there wouldn't be anything preventing that. Now again, that doesn't mean the Leafs want to trade him. But according to Elliot Friedman, the team may have floated his name around the market earlier just to gauge his value. And honestly, that's not unusual in the NHL. General managers often test the market on players simply to understand what kind of return they might get. Still, hearing his name connected to the Canadiens is enough to make fans pause. Because if you look at Montreal's roster, you can actually see why they would be interested. The Canadiens have a young core already forming around players like Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield, and someone like Knies, with his mix of size, skill, and physical play, would fit perfectly into that group. He could easily slot into their top 6, potentially even alongside Suzuki and Caulfield on the first line. And if Montreal were serious about pursuing him, they also have something Toronto might be interested in: depth in young prospects and players who could help the Leafs both now and in the future. That's why people around the league believe Knies would bring one of the best returns the Leafs could get in a trade. In fact, outside of Auston Matthews and William Nylander, who both have full no-move clauses, Knies might be the player on the roster who could attract the biggest package from other teams. But here's the part that I think matters the most from the player's perspective. When Knies was asked about the rumors, he didn't seem too bothered by them. He basically said he didn't look into it too much, and that in a market like Toronto, almost everyone becomes a target for trade speculation at some point. And honestly, that's probably the healthiest way to look at it. Because the reality is that once the off-season begins, the rumor mill is going to explode. The trade market is closed for now, but the moment the summer starts, teams across the league begin exploring possibilities again. And with the Leafs trying to figure out how to reshape their roster, players like Knies are naturally going to be part of those conversations. Now personally, as a fan, this is where things get complicated. On one hand, Knies is exactly the kind of player you want to build around. Big, skilled, young, and capable of playing physical playoff-style hockey. But on the other hand, if the Leafs are serious about making major roster improvements, especially if they need help on defense or depth down the middle, then sometimes the only way to get those pieces is by moving a valuable asset. And that's why this rumor has people paying attention. Because it raises the question, what direction is this team really heading? And when you connect that with the first story we talked about, the report that Brad Treliving is likely staying as the general manager, the bigger picture starts to become clear. If Treliving is staying in charge, then the responsibility of fixing this roster is going to fall directly on him this summer. And if he's going to make bold moves to turn this team around, players like Knies might end up being part of those discussions whether fans like it or not. So, when you put these two stories together, Leafs Nation, what you see is a team entering a really important offseason. The front office might stay the same, but the roster could still change, and the next few months might end up defining the future of this franchise. Now, as a fan, I think the feeling right now is a mix of concern and cautious hope. Concern because the direction of the team still feels uncertain, but hope because if the right moves are made, if the Leafs can reshape the roster in the right way, then maybe this rough season really does become just a temporary setback. But one thing is clear. The conversations happening right now around players like Matthew Knies show that this offseason could bring some very big decisions for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So when you step back and look at these two stories together, Leafs Nation, it really tells you a lot about the moment this franchise is living right now. On one side, we have this report saying Brad Treliving is likely staying as general manager. That means the organization may not be making the kind of front office change that a lot of fans were hoping for after a frustrating season. Instead, it looks like the Leafs might be betting on a quick turnaround, trusting that this same leadership group can reshape the roster and get this team back into playoff contention. But on the other side, you've got rumors already starting to swirl around players like Matthew Knies. And that's where things get interesting. Because when a young player with Knies' profile, big, skilled, only 23 years old, and signed long-term, starts appearing in trade speculation, it usually means the team is at least exploring what kind of value he might bring in a deal. That doesn't mean the Leafs want to move him, but it does mean the organization could be preparing for some serious decisions this summer. And when you combine that with the pressure on Treliving to fix the roster quickly, it really shows that this upcoming offseason could be one of the most important ones this franchise has had in a long time. As a fan, I think that's where the feeling sits right now. There's frustration with how this season played out. There's uncertainty about the direction of the team. But there's also that little bit of hope that if the right moves are made, this group could still bounce back. Because at the end of the day, the Leafs still have elite talent. The question now is whether the organization can build the right team around it. And Leafs Nation, I'm really curious to hear what you think about this. Do you trust Brad Treliving to turn things around this offseason? And how would you feel if Matthew Knies actually became part of a big trade? Let me know down in the comments. I always like hearing the opinions from other Leafs fans. And if you enjoy staying up to date with Leafs news and talking hockey like real fans do here on the channel, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. So if you want to help the channel hit that milestone, just tap the subscribe button and be part of Leafs Nation here with us.